Kate and George were in a good relationship. Not until one day where Kate starts to have thoughts about his boyfriend having an affair. She noticed that George is starting to get cold to her. She often sees him spend time with another girl, which really upsets her. Instead of spending time with her, George seems to enjoy more the company of other people. With all the evidence piling up, she decided to confront him. But it was to her surprise only to know that George's aloof behaviors are all due to planning and preparing how would his wedding proposal should go. Whether we like it or not, misjudgment is already part of our lives. It may not be like the case of Kate and George, but I'm pretty sure that for some points in our life, we were misjudged for someone we were not. Or we were misjudged for something that we didn't do. Or maybe it is us who misjudged somebody else. People sometimes think they are right even if they're wrong. Have you ever wondered why? So why don't you come and join me till the end of the video as I share why we are wrong when we think we are right. And also share some tips to avoid this. If you had to think about every possible option when making a decision, it would take a lot of time to make even if the simplest choice. Because of the complexity of the world and the amount of information around you, it is necessary sometimes to use mental shortcuts that enable you to act quickly and efficiently. Heuristics in psychology are rules of thumbs or mental shortcuts that help us to solve problems and make judgment quickly and efficiently. However, it can lead to cognitive biases when we constantly use heuristics. Cognitive bias is a systematic thinking errors or repeated patterns of thinking that can lead to predictable, inaccurate, or unreasonable conclusions. It may help people make quicker decisions, but those decisions aren't always accurate. While we might all like to think that we are rational and logical beings, the sad fact is that we are constantly under the influence of cognitive biases that distort our thinking, influence our beliefs, and sway every judgment we make every day. It is because people create their own subjective reality from their perceptions of things that we also dictate their behavior. Professor Chaehan introduces the idea of mental harmony puzzle. This is also similar to the concept of psychologist Daniel Kahneman, in which once we form thoughts, images, conclusions, or interpretations in our minds about anything, for example, your first impression on your teacher, it sticks to your mind, and you unconsciously filter the information that you receive by what we call selective perception so that your mind can feel a mental harmony. You tend to accept only the information that fits to your interpretation or your conclusions and throw away all that doesn't. To make it simple, cognitive biases are just like loopholes in your mind that do not let us think properly nearly all of the time. There are various types of cognitive biases, but for now, I'm only be sharing 4 common types. These are very essential to know because if not, others may take this opportunity to their advantage. or maybe to make money out of you. First, confirmation bias. It is the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories. In other words, we seek confirmation rather than disconfirmation of what we already believe. Instead of listening to the opposing sides and considering all of the facts in a logical and rational manner, people tend to simply look for things that reinforce what they already believe is true and ignore things that contradicts them. People tend to believe in the validity of their conclusion even when it is flawed, while on the other hand, people tend to disconfirm the validity of the conclusion even when it is true if it contradicts their pre-existing beliefs. Going back to the case of Kate and George, where Kate thought that her boyfriend is cheating. She then decided to conduct a personal investigation, but she only accepts information that confirms and supports her suspicions. She might have overlooked some facts that confront her thoughts. Not only that, because confirmation bias also affects the way people view political information, the way people conduct scientific research and police investigations, the way people assess their pseudoscientific beliefs, the way people decide how to invest, and the way doctors make diagnoses. In addition, John Casey said, we form beliefs about certain things and we can actually shift facts or detach ourselves from the truth or have the truth overwritten. And we can certainly use confirmation bias to make someone appear not as they really are and not on the same page as others. Optimism bias or unrealistic optimism. It is a tendency to overestimate the probability of positive events and underestimate the probability of negative events. It causes someone to believe that they themselves are less likely to experience a negative event. We assume that events like divorce, job loss, illness, and death happen to other people. In general, optimism bias is quite useful, yielding better life outcomes in certain situations. People with higher levels of optimism work harder and save more. But optimism is problematic to compliance to guidelines over time. It can lead people to take health risks like smoking, eating poorly, or not wearing a seatbelt. Overly optimistic predictions can be dangerous, leading us to waste time and resources pursuing unrealistic goals. Because in the real world, things don't always work out for the best. Such thinking is seen in many different situations, even in this pandemic. According to Professor Banuri of University of East Anglia, in her article last May 21, 2020, that optimism bias makes it harder to people to comply to lockdown as the time goes by. They think they are safe to go out of the house because they think they will not catch the coronavirus. Rhoda and her colleagues ran a survey last February 2020 across 4 European countries, including France, Italy, United Kingdom, and Switzerland, and found out that approximately half of the participants judged coronavirus infection less likely to happen to them than to other people. They also found out that 30% of the sample thought that they had 0% chance of catching the virus. Anchoring bias. It is the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information acquired when making decisions. This is an important concept to have in mind when navigating a negotiation or considering a price. For example, if you first see a cupcake that costs 50 pesos, then see a second one that costs 30 pesos, you're prone to see the second cupcake as cheap. Whereas, if you would merely see the second cupcake priced at 30 pesos, you would probably not view it as cheap. The anchor, which is the first price that you saw, unduly influenced your opinion. Self-serving bias. It is the tendency of people to take credit for positive events or outcomes, but blaming outside factors for negative events. For example, A student gets a good grade on a test and tells herself that she studied hard or is good at the material. But if she gets a bad grade on another test and says the teacher doesn't like her or the test was unfair. This bias can help protect our self-esteem, but this can also be faulty, like blaming others for our own shortcomings. Someone with depression or low self-esteem might reverse this self-serving bias, in which they attribute the negative events to something they did, and the positive events, they attribute it to luck or something somebody did. First, being aware of your bias. Research shows that once you see someone, you already form a judgment about them. Being aware of your bias makes you know that your judgment is flawed and that you're not really seeing the whole picture. Second, shift perspective. Once you know that you had already picture in your mind, you can jump to the other side of the picture. You have to find the concrete evidence. You have to find at least two arguments of your opposite opinion. For example, you saw someone that had helped an old man carry his own baggages, or had helped someone cross the streets. Third, consult others. It is hard to spot cognitive biases in ourselves. This is because it often comes to our subconscious thinking. For this reason, it is unwise to make major decisions on your own. It is helpful for you to surround yourself with people that can challenge your opinions and listen carefully and empathetically to their views, even when they tell you something that you don't want to hear. Lastly, take your time. We often rely on our fast and automatic thinking of our brain. There are things that require for a slower, more deliberative, and more logical thinking rather than for a fast, instinctive, and emotional thinking. We have seen how cognitive bias can negatively affect our lives. The better we understand them, the more often we can overturn them or even control them for our own benefit. Thank you so much for watching. Keep safe and God bless.